that's why I think, things in our lives can be generational curses, like you're talking about. And I mean, it kind of doesn't matter. Is it genetics or is it learned? It's probably both, because the people that we're learning from are often the ones we got our genes from, right? So, but you can have a generational curse, or you can switch it and have a generational blessing out of it. So as you model this for your daughter, and she learns different ways of handling the storms of life, because our children are going to have pain. We can't escape that, right? It's hard for me to think about my boys having their hearts broken by a girl or whatever, but they're going to go through it, right? So all I can do is try to parent them and model for them, hey, this is how the bodies handle adversity. Hey guys, Dr. D here with alphaomegawellness.com, and I'm really excited today that I get to talk to Autumn Coffey, and she's going to share with you how this therapy that we do at our office just significantly revolutionized her mental health. So welcome to our program, and I'm excited to see what we learned from Autumn today. Autumn.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So, tell me a little bit about you or how we came to meet.
Okay. We actually have a mutual friend who owned a business, and I was really just struggling with my mental health. I had been for years. Also struggled with addiction, so that was a component in all of that. And she said, you were doing a new treatment, and I should call you and just get some more info. So that's what I did.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So the treatment that we're talking about is ketamine.
Yes.
And I also have had ketamine therapy. It's really why I decided that we needed to offer that at our office. But tell me, you said that you were struggling with your mental health, but what did things actually look like for you before you came in, if you can share that?
So I had actually went to drug and alcohol treatment in 2019.
Okay.
And whenever I got out, a lot of times they're sticking you on multiple medications to manage, the side effects of mental health, depression, anxiety, all that stuff. And so I'd been on those for maybe about 6 months, and they keep upping them. The symptoms are coming back. And by about a year in, I was on an extremely high dose. I was seeing a lot of symptoms, gut, skin, all that stuff. And
so some of these meds were antidepressants, or
so we had antidepressants. That was the major one. And so Effexor actually, Effexor was the medicine, and that's one that's really strong, but also really hard to get off of.
Yeah, I was on it probably like 20 years ago or so,
And so in my mind, intuitively, I just knew I didn't want to be on antidepressants. I feel like they help make me functional, but I wasn't thriving in any sort of way. I was just merely like surviving. And so I was about to start switching antidepressants when I heard about ketamine. And so whenever I came to you, I had already started tapering. So, and that's when we did my first treatment. So
prior to coming in for the treatment, what did your life look like? You said that you weren't really thriving, but you were functional. But what did that look like for you, like on a daily basis? Because you're taking the antidepressant, it sounds like it's working to a degree. It has side effects.
Right.
And, I've noticed being on antidepressants before, sometimes they blunt my feelings that I would want to feel. But what was your day-to-day like?
So initially whenever I was like, oh, I cannot do this anymore, we had gotten a new dog and it was a puppy, and I was like, I don't even feel anything. I didn't have that new puppy feeling. I didn't. And I had noticed that a little bit before, that I wasn't having the lows that I had before, but I also wasn't having any highs either. I was just kind of like there, right in the middle. And I also noticed, the antidepressants did work, at each time they upped them, but it also totally aggravated my anxiety. Yeah. So it was like this. When they put you on meds, it's almost like, okay, we're going to put you on this antidepressant and it's going to help with this symptom, but then you're going to get this symptom. So we're going to add this and that's going to help with this. But in turn, and so by the time it was done, I was on, I want to say like 5 different medications. So then started the process of, okay, like, you know, I was reading a couple books talking about how, it's silly to say, but, you know, how much diet, sleep, all the things that you don't realize affect mental health, how it does. And then also, you know, the trauma work and all the cognitive behavior therapy, just different modalities that were, I wanted to incorporate, but felt like I couldn't because I was still so kind of all over the place. Right. Yeah.
What would you say that your family noticed back then?
Oh my goodness. God bless my family. God bless my husband, because the last 3 years were really, he was my support system. There were times I was not leaving the house just because I couldn't. The outside world, being around people, all that just triggered my anxiety so bad. And it just, I was miserable. And it's weird to say I was on antidepressants and even though I was sober and I was not using, things should get better, right? But I mean, technically speaking, they should, but none of that was getting better. And it was almost worse because then I was having to deal with all those feelings that and that underlying trauma that I had never dealt with before.
Right. So prior to going on all the antidepressants, there was drug use.
Yes.
But in some ways you were thriving a little bit more just because you were, or maybe you felt like you were.
I felt like I was. If you would have asked the people around me, I'm sure they would have a different opinion, but
we're definitely not recommending drug addiction to solve your problems.
No, but
I get what you're saying, like
feeling,
the medications.
I felt somewhat okay whenever I was controlling my mood with drugs and alcohol.
Right.
I didn't feel, I guess I should put a period at I didn't feel.
Right.
And that's what the effect that I was going for.
Right.
Is I didn't want to feel the emotional pain.
Right.
The overwhelm that I did. And so for a long time, drugs and alcohol just kind of assisted me with managing my mood.
Well, that's the thing about drugs and alcohol is they are a solution. If they weren't, we wouldn't use them. Right. Now, they're not a great solution.
Right.
And they're definitely not a great long-term solution. But in our minds, in that space, when we just want to unplug, they are a solution. And that's why there's such an issue. I mean, for me with my hydrocodone addiction, like it made the day a little bit better because I didn't feel so overwhelmed.
Yeah, totally.
Now it leads to downstream problems. And,
but we're America and we want the short-term fix. So in the moment, that's what worked. And
just kick the can further down the road, right?
We'll deal with it later.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like that your family noticed that you weren't thriving. You weren't feeling the feelings. You weren't having the highs, not the lows, but it was all just kind of in the middle. But you didn't feel like that was where you wanted to be.
I think too, you know, I was going to therapy, and I think I talked to you a little bit about earlier, like the ideas of what I needed to do were all there. Like my therapist could tell me everything that I needed to do. But you can't necessarily just do that if your brain has never processed things that way. Yeah,
you told me before we started recording that you gave an example of like reading a book.
Yeah. So
what was that?
Yeah. So, you know, everybody's just like, think positive, or you go through therapy and they have these solutions for you, and it was equivalent to somebody handing you a book and it explains how to do a backflip. Well, like, that you should be able to do that if you read that, right? But no, that's not how it works.
When you first try to do it.
Right. So I'm like,
gonna break your neck.
Yeah, I'm reading all that stuff and I'm like, yes, all that stuff makes sense. But in the moment when, you know, especially with PTSD, you have the physiological reactions.
Oh yeah, the flooding and everything comes
all that stuff that comes with it, and your brain is just on fire and it's like, help, essentially.
Right. So, your challenge was, I'm sober, I'm taking these antidepressants, I'm not as depressed and low as what I've been. But how are you feeling about that place that you were at? Like, were you feeling like something's got to change, or were you feeling like this is how it's just going to be? Or
my fear, Had I not used drugs for as long as I did, I would be dead because I was not okay. And so you remove the drugs, which essentially like peels off this bandage of a wound, and all that is just raw. And that's what I felt like. I felt like a person that was walking through life, like any little thing would physiologically, I would feel so overwhelmed. I would feel so panicked. And so it's like, okay, if I can't handle anything, I'm just going to stay home and just stay in this little bubble. I remember my friend, because I was trying all different types of things. It wasn't just ketamine that I tried. I tried Reiki. I tried, you know what I mean? I went to all, when you're in this place, you're willing to do about anything. Hence the drugs and the alcohol, you know. So I was going through Ayurveda, like you name it, I probably tried it. And my friend said, she said, what if there isn't a solution? Like, what if this is just how it's gonna be? Oh yeah. And I remember I had tears in my eyes, and I said, I have to have hope because I cannot live like this. I just can't. So I was hopeful that there was something out there, but I didn't really have a lot of, nothing had helped. So
you're just trying whatever is out there. Okay. So you came in, chatted with me. We talked about ketamine therapy. I told you about my experience with it. And then you decided, I want to proceed with this treatment. So can you tell me, like, you came in and you did one infusion, and then how were things after just that one? I
wish I could explain, because it's hard to articulate a feeling, right? And so the process itself is not like, people are like, oh, you're going to do drugs and I'm like, no, it's not like that. It's actually not a drug that I would choose to use recreationally, because the beginning, it's kind of a fearful experience. It's something that you've never experienced before. And so, sorry, what was the question?
So the question is, after you had just one infusion, I mean, did you notice if that helped or it didn't really help, or like?
And it's just like taking an asprin. They use this example in AA a lot. You take an aspirin, you don't know when the desire to stop drinking leaves, but it does. And it was kind of like that with this. I didn't know, there was no like big, huge thing that happened. I just remember feeling peace, and just like being like going throughout my day, and mental health was always on my mind. Like, this is always going through my head, always on my mind. And I remember just going about my day and like not thinking, and I say thinking, but I think I mean like your internal dialogue. There was no second guessing myself. There was no anxiety. There was the feelings that I had because of PTSD. I didn't have those initially. Those did come back, and I did subsequent treatments, but so
even after just one, you noticed things were different. I guess what I feel like you're describing is mental health. That topic wasn't taking up all this real estate in your head. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay.
And I don't know, just the experience itself was strange, but
trippy.
Yes, it is trippy. Visuals and we both. I listen to music. I think you do as well. But the feeling of peace you have after you can let go that you don't have control during that experience. If you can let go of that fear of not having control, is actually a very peaceful experience. The feeling of just very much connected with other people. And you know, a lot of my trauma came from my childhood, and I remember I was very angry about a lot of that. And after the ketamine, there was almost a empathy for things that happened and the people that were in my life. Looking at it from a space of like, you know, I screwed up a lot, but I was doing the best that I could, and I think they were doing the best that they could too. So it's perspective shift and also mind shift.
I remember when I had my infusion in Southern Indiana, the very first thing that I told my wife and the PA that I knew who was working there at this clinic, the very first thing I said was, I want everyone to do that.
Right.
I just felt empathy. It was a pleasant experience for me. I kind of laid there in the recliner with my eyes covered, and I had my hands on the armrest of the recliner, and I would kind of rub my index finger back and forth like, I'm still here. I didn't want to take the covering off I didn't want to disrupt the experience because I found it very pleasant. But at the same time, I think even for people with a history of drug addiction like you and me, the psychedelics don't tend to be something that hit that point in our brain where it's like, I need to do that again and again and again, right? There's not that reward. Even, I mean, there's a lot of research being done on psilocybin. They expect that MDMA, ecstasy, is going to be approved in 2024 for the treatment of PTSD, right? Psilocybin, ayahuasca, ibogaine, 5-MeO-DMT, all of these things are being intensely researched. And in general, I mean, I think MDMA can hit some pretty significant reward centers in the brain. And so, but in general, the psychedelics, we don't see that habitual need to keep doing that. I mean, ketamine truly is a drug of abuse. I mean, it's used at raves and in different doses than what we use. And, you know, a lot of times, or all the times with the psychedelics, we should talk about set and setting. That's what is the key. Set being what is your intention with this, and the setting is what's that physical environment that you're in, right? I mean, don't do shrooms in Times Square. That's probably not going to bless you. That's not a good setting. But for someone to do a psilocybin journey in a place where they do that and it's for healing, I mean, I feel like God created these compounds. I mean, ketamine is synthetic, but like ayahuasca and psilocybin, ibogaine, like these things are God-created compounds that can be used for good. We can use anything for bad. We've proven that as humans. But yeah, so I found my experience pleasant. I just felt like, and then I saw the benefit from just one treatment. So you were better after one treatment. Tell me how things were for you when you finished a series of treatments. Like, what did you notice at that point?
So by the time I had finished my series, I was completely off Effexor, and I had started on 300 milligrams of Effexor. So I was on a pretty high dose. I tapered. I did this and, you know, congruency with tapering. So it was almost like, okay, can we even me out at the same time? But so, yeah. And I had did that set and then stopped. And then I had just came back again recently before I went on a trip. And I was telling you this before because I was like, I want to get another one. I was starting to feel a little funky, and I had the best trip that I've ever had. I just was so relaxed. I wasn't, the physiological responses weren't there that typically were there. And I want to go back to something you were just talking about with the set and setting being so important, because I think that is something I look at this as therapy. This is not like, I'm coming to do this and have a good time. There's a purpose for this. And I think if you're very intentional with it and you use it for its intended purpose, it can help so much. It's life-changing. And so I would, whatever time I was coming in, I would go, okay, this is what's coming up in my typical life, you know, or I need to let this go. For me, the first time I remember coming to and being like, you were like, okay, so how was it? And I was like, I was afraid I wasn't coming back. But for me, that first time was about releasing control. That's what that was. And then after that, I think, trying to remember, I feel like one of them was I wanted to release resistance, because my mind so often resists what's good for it. And, you know, whenever I am trying to take action, my brain, especially with ADHD, I have executive function, right? So I just want to do the opposite of whatever's good for me in general. But that was one of the things that, you know, I wrote in my journal. I want to release the resistance to, you know, people, places, and things that are good for me. And so, yeah, just being intentional, I think, about your use for it is also an important component of it.
So you said this was the best vacation ever after you got that last treatment. So you shared with me a story about something that happened when you first got to your destination. Yeah. So what was that?
So a lot of my physical responses are feelings, and it stems from I have a child with special needs. There was a lot of medical emergencies when he was young, ambulances, seizures. And for me, anytime I feel overwhelmed or my adrenaline goes, it like sets it off. And you can literally see it. My whole face will get red.
Yeah.
I can feel just like, if I could climb a wall, I would, because that's the energy and the intensity that I feel inside.
You don't really have any control over that.
No.
Yeah.
And
it just happens physiologically.
It happens physiologically, right? And so, and then I would behave in such a way that I'm like freaking out, and everybody around me is like, not people, but in general, people are probably like, what is this? What is wrong with this woman? Because it's such an irrational response to what is going on in the moment.
And it's irrational.
And I know it's irrational, but you can't help it, which almost turns this into like a huge shame spiral of like, why are you like this? But so to go back, we had just gotten to the Bahamas. We take transportation from the airport to our resort, and we get off, and my husband, he's like, where's my phone? I left my phone. And so like physically, I immediately felt that response come up. I was like about to start freaking out, and then I was like, it's not a big deal. And I call it, there's like this choice point in those moments. And now that pause has given me, and ketamine has given me that change. Like, it's like, I don't have that.
You can see a decision.
I can see it, and it can be logical, and my body doesn't go off the rails.
Right.
Yeah.
So what happened? You just kind of were chill and...
You know what? Yes. I sat on, and even my daughter was like, you're not freaking out right now. I was like, no big deal. It'll either find it or you won't. And she was like, okay.
Yeah. Which is a great thing to model for her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we were talking about that as well, whether it's genetics or environment that, loads the gun, pulls the trigger. And so, they say addiction and mental health, this all has a genetic component, but it also has an environmental component. And when my daughter sees me react in those ways, because I can't help it, I'm modeling that for her. And so that is another great insight into seeing how how I was, because my daughter started reacting the same way in situations. Right. And I'm like, what? You know what I mean? What are you doing?
Right.
So
that's why I think, things in our lives can be generational curses, like you're talking about. And it kind of doesn't matter. Is it genetics or is it learned? It's probably both, because the people that we're learning from are often the ones we got our genes from. Right. So, but you can have a generational curse, or you can switch it and have a generational blessing out of it. So as you model this for your daughter, and she learns different ways of handling the storms of life, because our children are going to have pain. We can't escape that, right? It's hard for me to think about my boys having their hearts broken by a girl or whatever, but they're going to go through it, right? So all I can do is try to parent them and model for them, hey, this is how the bodies handle adversity. Yeah. Right. So I just love that, we could even see that the work that you've done, not just the ketamine, the ketamine and the work and the journaling and the cognitive behavioral therapy and all this stuff, you have a chance to shift that generationally. Yeah.
And we're already seeing that's something else, is just me and my husband, when I can change my behavior because my physical response is not the same, it's such a better place. And we're already seeing huge changes in my own daughter, because I can regulate my own emotions. There was a time where there was zero emotional regulation, and ketamine is a huge part of why I'm now able to not be in it in the moment. And I can have that insight into, okay, this is illogical or logical and act appropriately.
Well, I think that pause. I think it was Viktor Frankl who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, psychiatrist that was in Auschwitz. And, one of the things that he concluded is that there's stimulus and there's response, but in between the two is the gap. And the gap is what I get to own. Right. I don't get to control the stimulus. But, I think what he realized is he didn't get to control how the guards treated him, but he got to control his response to that.
Right.
So if they wanted to mistreat him and he said, I hope you have a good day, like they didn't get to control how he responded. Right. And that's exactly what you're talking about, taking control of the gap.
Right.
And you feel like ketamine's.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. You can go to all the therapy you want, but if you can't embody what you're learning because you have never done it before, then there's a huge problem.
Well, I think that probably speaks to ketamine does a couple of things. It decreases inflammation in the brain. A lot of mood disorders are related actually to physical inflammation in the brain. It regulates glutamine, but it also boosts BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. I've talked about it on the podcast, on the videos before. I mean, that's a chemical that the body makes, but ketamine boosts that.
Okay.
And it is responsible for the neuroplasticity of the brain. So it's your brain allowing you to see, hey, these traumatic things that happened to me, this person who maybe injured me, maybe that person had been injured themselves, and maybe that person was actually doing the best that he or she could with what they had. That empathy that you were talking about, right? And so I think that just understanding how ketamine works, it just fits perfectly with what you're describing.
Well, and I'm glad that you are talking more about the mechanics of it, because I have a harder time explaining. I'm like, I don't know, it just changes your brain. But kind of another analogy that I've used is whenever you go to church or work, do you always park in the same spot? You
Pretty
do,
much,
right?
Yeah. Right.
So your brain processes, I think, 9,000? I don't know, but 6,000 of these are subconscious.
Oh, I'm sure.
Right? So you have all this stuff that you have no control over in your brain. It's your subconscious. And that somehow gets in there and rewires it, because my thinking is just like you park in your car at church. You go to the same spot. It's worn its grooves away in my brain. I'm on autopilot. Yeah. And so the ketamine, essentially is giving your brain new pathways, neuroplasticity, and it's changing the way your brain is working.
Well, literally, so there's these dendritic cells that have these spines that connect neurons. It literally causes the dendritic cells to develop more spine, literally causes more connections.
Right.
I described it to people this way, Autumn. It was, it's as if we get these ruts in our brain, like our Jeep tires are kind of stuck in the ruts.
Yeah.
And it's almost like ketamine disrupts those ruts so that the Jeep can find a new path, right? Maybe a paved path, and it's not stuck where you can't get out. And I think it's the BDNF, it's the decreased inflammation, it's the dendritic cells having more connections. It's literally changing those neuronal connections.
Well, and I like that is giving us our power back, because I think, and you go to the psychiatrist who tells you, you have a chemical imbalance in your brain, right? So you go and you're like, oh no, this is me.
Right.
I just have just like I have high blood pressure, I have a chemical imbalance. So I need these antidepressants to make it so that I'm balanced. And when almost those antidepressants eventually are making you worse, then you're like, okay, well, what do I do now then? Yeah. What's the answer now?
Yeah. We use the SSRIs, but people are not actually lacking serotonin. Right. So the idea you have a deficiency of serotonin, it's just not accurate. Now, do the SSRIs help with depression? They do. But the data says that exercise is as effective as SSRIs at treating depression. Exercise boosts BDNF.
Well, and just like you're in functional medicine, you're getting to the root cause, you're fixing your brain, whereas with SNRIs and SSRIs, you're just putting a Band-Aid over it. And it's coming with all these host of other side effects. Your gut is all jacked up, which is what 90% of your serotonin's made in your gut.
Absolutely.
So, and then
the gut sends 10 times as many signals to the brain as the brain does to the gut. So there's this whole brain-gut axis.
Right.
They actually talk about the enteric brain, or the gut brain. It's so responsible for so many aspects of our health. 70% of our immune system is housed in our gut, right? So when the gut's getting unhealthy, it leads to all these other things. We know in functional medicine that even adjusting these other levers of nutrition, like giving my body things that turn down inflammation, giving my body substances that fuel how the mitochondria make ATP, helps with mood. And then you adjust the lever of nutrition, you adjust the lever of sleep, you adjust the lever of body movement, you adjust the lever of like healthy relationships, and then how we're handling stress and our spiritual walk. And all of these things as well can mitigate symptoms of depression also. So, I mean, you've done a nice job of kind of taking that all-encompassing path to get healthy. And so it's not any one thing, but I mean, I've said, I haven't seen any one thing move the needle in mental health like ketamine does. Now, that's from my experience of what I've had in giving people. Like, other psychedelics are being studied that are also impactful. But ketamine is Indiana's only legal psychedelic. So it's what we have. But yeah, definitely, I think as we move forward, I think these sorts of therapies are going to get more traction because I think they're so impactful in the mental health space. I mean, we live in a world full of people who are struggling. And, you know, sometimes, especially for men, the depression is not presented in a classical manner. Sometimes men are just angry. But the root cause of that is depression. And so if you start addressing that, then the anger gets better and the reactivity gets better and the emotional regulation improves.
I think, you know, if your go-to emotion is anger, then anger is what comes out with everything. It comes out during sadness. It comes out during overwhelm and depression. So, that's a good thing to know.
So did he find his phone?
He did.
Okay. That's good.
It all worked out, right?
That's good. Yeah. And so you didn't have to blow up over it, and it was going to be fine.
But here's the thing. I probably would have, if I wouldn't have done the treatment, I would have, it wouldn't have been a blow up at a more, I like was, and I don't know, it's the irrational fear of like the unknown. I don't know, but I'm just much more better equipped to handle that. I'm pretty chill now. It's so nice. I love it. Yes.
So if there's somebody that watches or listens to this and they're in the place where they're struggling with their mental health, depression or anxiety or PTSD or just all of the above, and maybe they've thought about doing ketamine therapy, but it's kind of out there, like what advice would you give them?
I would just say, here's your sign. Honestly, I believe that everything happens for a reason. And I think I was led to you for a reason. And I think if somebody's watching this and, you know, they're considering it, I just think, why not try it? If you've tried everything else, or save a step and don't try anything else if you have depression or PTSD, because I wish that I would have found this years ago. It would have saved a lot. But I also, like I said, I think things happen for a reason. And it has completely changed my life.
I love hearing that. I love hearing that. I mean, I was sharing with you earlier, I got a text the day before Easter, and some guy said, man, I just want to wish you and Megan a happy Easter. God bless your work. You've allowed me to feel good for the first time in many years. And I look at that and I'm like, I've never written a Prozac or a Lexapro script and got that text from somebody.
No.
Right? But we consistently get that kind of feedback from people that are just, I mean, I had a lady who was bringing her husband, and she's the one who wanted him to come do this. And she told me after his third treatment, she said, if you had told me he would be this way after 3 treatments, I simply would not have believed you. I'm like, but just organically, like, she's volunteering this. She's like, it was better. He had a better result than she had even hoped that he would have.
Well, and I think it too, whenever it's not something tangible, like, how do you explain how you're feeling? And so that's why I think it was important. That's why I, you know, volunteered to do this. I said, I think other people being able to hear an experience to where it's hard to explain and it doesn't always make sense, you know, but it works. So
people want to know the experience of people who've been through it. You know, and I mean, I get to talk to a couple people, like if they arrange time to just do a consult to talk about ketamine and see if they're a good candidate, and I share with them my experience and how it helped me. But people want to hear from other people who are using it and that they can, they're like, oh, well, she's a mess, or she was a mess, like I'm a mess.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I was a mess.
I mean, and it's no different than, like I said, when patients come to me for addiction and I share with them, like, oh, I've been there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we identify with people who are like us.
Yes.
and really, to help people, you don't have to have all the answers. You just need to be further along in that process than they are.
Right.
And then you can lead them. And I feel like that's what you're doing for people today.
I hope so. That's kind of my motto that I've adopted is heal louder.
Yeah.
Because I think
like
so often we're quiet and there's a lot of shame surrounding a lot of these issues. And so when you can get rid of that shame and kind of take ownership of where you were and where you're going, I think you can help more people. So.
And we get stuck in shame, but the truth of the matter is everyone loves a story. A story of someone conquering.
Yeah.
So we feel like people are going to look poorly at us. And I mean, I think one of the gifts God gave me was just kind of overcoming that. And then I share my struggles. I believe in teaching from my scars, not my open wounds. Right. I mean, you need some prudence there. Right. I didn't want to start talking about my drug addiction when I was just barely out of that.
Right.
But now that there's been years, I can share that. But I feel like God wants to repurpose our pain.
Right.
And in fact, a verse that changed my life, 2 Corinthians 1, 3, and 4, I'm going to paraphrase it, but it essentially says, the God of all comfort comforts us so that we can take that same comfort that he provided us to other people. And I'm like, that's how you change the world. Right? You go, hey, look what God did for me here. Right. Let me show you what I found. Yeah. And we can't do that if we're healing quietly.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, we have to get out there and just share with other people, like, oh, hey, this is how I screwed this up, or this is how I was a mess, and this is where I am now. Yeah. And that's impactful for people. And I'm sure I've needed people to model that for me so that I knew that there was hope.
Yeah. There's some of my greatest connections have come through me being vulnerable with other people about where I am and what I've gone through.
Yeah. So. I love that.